It started with a whisper, the kind of rumor that doesn't just circulate, it crackles. The first murmur emerged from an anonymous post on a niche Marvel fan forum, a late-night message buried between theories about mutant timelines and wishful castings for the next wave of Avengers. Heard from a friend working on pre-production for a 2027 Marvel tentpole. Timothée Chalamet. Major role. Studios playing it crazy close to the chest. No proof. No receipts. Just 27 words and a ticking clock before it all exploded. By sunrise it was everywhere. Twitter, still clutching onto life in 2025, lit up like Times Square on New Year's Eve. Fan accounts posted side-by-side images of Chalamet and moody indie films next to glossy, digitally enhanced Marvel concept art. Was he a hero? A villain? Someone unexpected? They didn't know. But what they did know was that it felt right. Chalamet was, after all, the kind of actor who carried a whole spectrum inside him: fragility and ferocity, vulnerability and unpredictability. He was a heartthrob and an artist, a walking paradox in soft cashmere and chainmail Dior. Marvel had its Chris's, sure. But maybe it was time for someone else. At first, the major outlets ignored it. They'd heard it all before, the false starts, the name drops meant to bait clicks. But something about this one had a different energy. Maybe it was because the rumor didn't just float, it stuck. Fans dissected it like archaeologists combing through ancient artifacts. Which character could it be? A lost mutant prince? A morally gray cosmic scientist? A young, conflicted hero whose charm masked the weight of impossible decisions? Entertainment blogs couldn't resist for long. By the end of the day, the biggest names, Variety, Deadline, even the more buttoned-up Hollywood Reporter, ran with it. Each one sourced it differently. A close associate. An individual with knowledge of the matter. An industry insider familiar with current negotiations. None of them had confirmation, but it didn't matter. The machine was running, and it wasn't stopping. Even Timothée himself, caught by a swarm of paparazzi outside a West Village coffee shop, didn't deny it. When asked point-blank, his response was quintessential Chalamet, half smile, half shrug. "Can't believe everything you read online," he said, holding his oat milk latte like it was a lifeline. But there was a glimmer in his eye, the kind that doesn't belong to someone entirely in the dark. Marvel, for its part, was silent. That wasn't unusual. Secrecy was their currency, and they spent it well. But the quiet wasn't enough to quell the storm. Speculation had already reached the point of no return. Every character from every corner of the Marvel library, obscure and iconic, was dragged into the conversation. Some were convinced Chalamet was about to step into the role of a younger Magneto, a reinvention meant to weave the mutants into the post-Endgame timeline. Others saw him as Nova, Marvel's cosmic ace in the hole, destined to fill the vacuum left by Captain Marvel and Guardians of the Galaxy. And then there were the boldest theories, the ones that had the internet fighting in the trenches of comment sections and Discord servers. What if he was a young Doctor Doom? Or an alternate reality Peter Parker, one who never needed a mask to become a legend? The truth, though, was known by only a handful of people, and they weren't talking. Not yet. But behind the scenes, on studio lots in Burbank and secret Zoom calls between talent agents and Marvel's notoriously tight-lipped casting directors, something real was happening. Timothée's phone had rung just a few weeks earlier. A quiet conversation, the kind with no fanfare, no fireworks, just the rustling of papers, the soft hum of possibility. "Are you open to a conversation?" the voice had asked. Timothée had paused, fingers tapping against the edge of his kitchen counter. The last time Marvel came knocking, he was barely out of high school. Spider-Man. That role had slipped through his fingers, gone to Tom Holland instead. At the time, it felt like fate. Now, fate felt a little less certain. "Yeah," he'd said finally, voice soft but sure. "Let's talk." That's how it started. Just a conversation. A whisper in a sea of noise. And in 2025 that whisper was about to become deafening. The meeting was set for a Tuesday afternoon, quiet, discreet, and held not at Marvel's usual glass-walled Burbank offices, but at a tucked-away creative space rented under a generic LLC name. That was standard Marvel protocol when the stakes were high. And if Timothée Chalamet even considered stepping into their universe, the stakes were very high. Timothée arrived alone, dressed like only he could, effortlessly thrown together layers that somehow looked editorial, with a soft black hoodie framing his curls and a battered leather notebook tucked under his arm. If he was nervous, he didn't show it. If anything, there was a strange calm about him, like someone stepping into a room they'd already dreamed about a dozen times. The conference room was bare, almost aggressively so. No posters, no Marvel-branded swag, nothing to hint at the sprawling cinematic empire that was quietly rebooting itself from within. Just a long table, a carafe of water, and 3 people on the other side. 1 casting executive, 1 creative producer, and because no Marvel meeting happened without a little extra muscle, 1 legal representative, expression carefully blank. They skipped the small talk. "We're building something new," the producer said, her hands clasped together like she was bracing for impact. "It's not just the next phase. It's a new language." Timothée listened, head tilted just slightly. He knew the pitch before they even started, because this was how they always pitched actors like him, the ones with awards in one hand and a fanbase in the other. They wouldn't say they needed him. They'd say he was part of the evolution, part of something bigger than just a film. An artist, helping to shape the voice of the future. It was a good pitch. A familiar one. But what came next surprised him. "We're not offering you a role," the casting exec said. "Not yet." Timothée blinked, that crooked smile flickering across his face. "Then what are we doing here?" "We're asking you to help us figure out who you could be." It wasn't a traditional audition, not in the usual sense. There were no sides to read, no scenes to improvise. What they wanted was simpler, and riskier. "We want to build this character around you," the producer said. "That's why this is secret. This isn't just slotting you into a suit someone else has worn. This is ground floor." Timothée leaned back, tapping his fingers lightly against the table. He could feel the weight of what they were asking. This wasn't just an offer. This was an invitation to co-create, to be part of the DNA of the next 10 years of Marvel's story. It was flattering, sure. But it was also dangerous. "Who do you see?" he asked, his voice soft. "When you think of me in this world?" The producer exchanged a glance with the casting exec, the kind of glance that said, "We've had this conversation more times than we can count." "There are a few directions," the casting exec said carefully. "One of them is completely new." Timothée raised an eyebrow. "A character that doesn't exist in the comics," she clarified. "Someone born out of where the MCU is heading, post-con, post-multiverse chaos. Something entirely original." That was bold, even for Marvel. Fans could be brutal when the studio strayed too far from established lore. But there was something appealing about it. A blank slate, a story no one could pre-write in their heads. "What's the other option?" Timothée asked, his curiosity fully piqued now. The producer hesitated for just a second, then said the name. "Johnny Storm." The air shifted. The Human Torch. Iconic, flawed, tragic in the right hands. Already rebooted once, disastrously, but primed for resurrection now that the Fantastic Four were officially stepping into the MCU spotlight. Timothy's lips parted slightly, but he said nothing. That was a name. That was weight. "We're rethinking the family," the producer continued quickly, as if trying to fill the silence. "Not just younger, but more complex. The charm, the swagger, it's there, but there's also damage. Something raw underneath. And we think you could give him a heartbeat no one's ever seen before." Timothée was quiet for a long moment, the tip of his tongue running across his lower lip, a telltale sign that his mind was moving fast. He wasn't the obvious choice for a role like that. His frame, his vibe, it was always more poet than playboy. But maybe that's exactly why they wanted him. "Johnny Storm," he repeated, tasting the name. "We don't want an archetype," the producer said softly. "We want you." It was tempting, and Marvel knew it. There was something irresistible about taking a character known for surface-level bravado and handing it to an actor who built his career on vulnerability. It was the kind of twist that could either crash spectacularly or redefine an icon. "And the third option?" Timothée asked, his voice low. This time, it was the legal rep who answered. "We're exploring what it would look like to bring Victor Von Doom into the MCU, younger." Timothée didn't move, didn't blink, but they saw the way his posture changed, just slightly. Doom wasn't just a villain. Doom was mythology, a Shakespearean storm of intellect, rage, and unrelenting control. It was the kind of role you don't just play, you become. "We'd be rethinking everything," the producer added quickly. "Not just age, but origins. Motives. Relationships. He's not just a foil for Reed Richards, he's the dark side of the entire new saga." For the first time, Timothée exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair. They'd come prepared, and they were handing him options no actor in his generation had ever been offered. Not just a role, but a choice between building a hero, reimagining a legend, or rewriting evil itself. There was no decision that day. Timothée left the meeting with nothing but a folder, no script, just concepts, sketches, and pages of notes detailing the future Marvel wanted to build with him at the center. He walked back onto the street, the California sun too bright, the air too loud. The city moved around him, but all he could hear was his own breath, and three names echoing in his head. A new character. Johnny Storm. Victor Von Doom. The rumors were out there now, wild and unchecked. But none of them were close to the truth. Because the truth was, Timothée Chalamet wasn't just joining the MCU. He was about to choose who he was going to be. The days after that meeting felt like living inside a pressure cooker, except the heat wasn't coming from the studio. It was from everywhere else. Social media was relentless. Fan accounts were photoshopping Timothée's face onto every Marvel character from Silver Surfer to Wolverine. YouTube breakdown channels analyzed his every movement, right down to what comic book stores he was photographed near. It was obsessive, borderline psychotic, and impossible to ignore. But Timothée? He didn't flinch. On the surface, life went on as usual. Paparazzi caught him leaving a Pilates studio in the village, iced matcha in hand. He showed up at a friend's off-Broadway play, all in black, slouched in the third row like any other low-key New Yorker. To anyone watching, he was unbothered. Only a few people knew the truth. Every few days, a new script page would arrive, delivered by hand, no emails, no PDFs. Printed on watermarked paper that dissolved in water after 24 hours. Some pages were dialogue, others just mood pieces, scenes with no context, just raw emotion meant to test how far Timothée could stretch. The assignments were simple, but the weight of them was suffocating. One was just a single sentence. "You can't save me if you're the one who destroyed me." No context. No character name. Just that. Timothée read it a dozen times, pacing his apartment, mumbling the line under his breath, feeling it shift and reshape with every take. It could have been Johnny talking to his sister, Sue. It could have been Doom talking to Reed. It could have been anyone. That was the point. Marvel didn't want to see him act. They wanted to see who he became when no one was watching. The hardest part? The silence. Not from the studio, from his own team. His agents, his manager, they were almost too quiet. Nobody was pushing him one way or another. They knew how Timothée worked. The more you pressed, the more he slipped through your fingers. They had to let him wrestle with it alone. That's not to say the choices didn't haunt him. Johnny Storm would be fun. A chance to stretch muscles he never flexed on screen. The cocky swagger, the reckless energy, the buried self-doubt, all of it was a playground, especially if they wanted to make the fantastic for a true family drama instead of just a spectacle. Timothée could already picture the scenes, Johnny cracking jokes while flaming on, but behind the grin, that quiet sense that he was always the expendable one. The flashy distraction, not the heart of the team. But then there was Doom. Doom was a whole different beast. There was no charm in him, at least not the easy, crowd-pleasing kind. Doom was philosophy wrapped in armor, tragedy masquerading as power. Marvel's greatest villain, if they did him right. And the idea of turning him into something younger, sharper, someone who hadn't yet calcified into the monster, was intoxicating. Doom wasn't just a role. Doom was a coronation. And the original character? That was the wild card. It was the safest option creatively, no baggage, no comparisons to past versions. But it was also the riskiest for his career. If it flopped, it would fall on him. No excuses. No history to blame. Every night, Timothée would sit on the fire escape of his apartment, the city pulsing below him, and run the options over in his mind like a gambler fingering chips at a poker table. Each one came with a price. Each one could change everything. And then came the calls. Not from Marvel, from other actors. The ones already inside the machine. The first was from Tom Holland. "Whatever you do," Tom said, his voice crackling through a London to New York call, "don't lose yourself in it. They'll offer you the world, but you have to know who you are first." That was Tom's way. Friendly advice wrapped in lived experience. He didn't warn Timothée off, he just reminded him that Marvel was like quicksand. The more you fought to control it, the faster it swallowed you. The second call was from Florence Pugh. "Go villain," she said bluntly. "Heroes are fun. Villains stay with you." She said it like it was obvious. Maybe to her, it was. But the call that stayed with him the longest came from Oscar Isaac. "Don't think about what it does to your career," Oscar said. "Think about what it does to you. The stories you carry stay inside you, even after the cameras stop. So pick the one you're willing to live with." Timothée didn't sleep much that night. He didn't want to admit it, not even to himself, but deep down, one name was starting to eclipse the others. Doom. It wasn't just the tragedy or the brilliance. It was the why of him. The need to control, to impose order on a world that had humiliated and broken him. The pain that hardened into armor, both literal and emotional. There was something in Doom that scared Timothée, something that felt too close to parts of himself he'd always tried to hide. That was what made it impossible to resist. But there was one final test. Marvel wanted him to improvise, one unscripted monologue, filmed alone, no notes, no guidance. Just Timothée, a camera, and whatever character came through. He didn't pick Johnny. He didn't pick the original character. He pressed record, and let Doom speak. And what came out was terrifying. It wasn't loud. It wasn't cartoonish. It was quiet, almost a whisper. A voice that knew power didn't come from volume. It came from certainty. From knowing, with absolute clarity, that the world would bend to your will, or break beneath it. "No crown is given freely." Timothée, no Doom, murmured, eyes flickering with something dark. "It must be taken, torn from the hands of those who have failed to protect it." His hand drifted over his face, as if feeling the invisible mask already there. "And no mask can truly hide what we are. Only reveal it." He sent the file at 3:27 a.m. He didn't need to wait for a response. He already knew. The response didn't come in the form of an email or a phone call. No formal contracts, no PR-friendly statements, not yet. Marvel played these moments like a high-stakes chess game, and Timothée Chalamet had just made his move. Now it was their turn. The day after he sent the video, his phone stayed eerily silent. No text from his agent, no cryptic "You're trending again" messages from his friends. Even the usual Marvel rumor mill seemed to have gone quiet. But Timothée knew better. Silence didn't mean inactivity. It meant they were watching. The video was short, barely 2 minutes long, but it was electric. It wasn't Timothée reading lines. It was Victor Von Doom, stripped of armor, standing in a cold room, speaking to no one and everyone at the same time. There was no cackling monologue, no cartoonish threats. It was quieter, more surgical. It was a man who knew he would own the world, not because he wanted to, but because he had to. Because weakness disgusted him. Because if you weren't shaping the world, you were being shaped by it. And Doom? Doom would never be shaped again. Marvel's creative team had seen 1,000 auditions, from A-listers to complete unknowns. But this wasn't an audition. It was something else. It was ownership. And that terrified them, in the best possible way. Behind closed doors at Marvel Studios, 2 floors below Marvel's top-secret development wing, a room known internally as the Vault, existed solely for the discussion of what they called generational choices. These were the decisions that would define not just a film, not just a phase, but the entire future of the MCU. The big whiteboard in the vault had been wiped clean and rewritten a dozen times since 2023, after the multiverse saga had tangled itself into knots. There were sketches of new story arcs, rough timelines for upcoming films, and character names underlined and crossed out so often they looked like battle plans. At the center of it all, circled twice in red, was one word: Doom. Kevin Feige himself had once said, offhandedly at a creative retreat, "If we screw up Doom, we've screwed up everything." Doom wasn't just a villain. Doom was the spine. The new Thanos. The one character whose shadow would fall across the entire next decade of storytelling. They needed him to be perfect. And Timothy's tape? It wasn't perfect. It was terrifyingly alive. It didn't feel like someone playing Doom. It felt like someone opening a door into his mind and letting them watch him become Doom in real time. The vulnerability, the human ache beneath the arrogance, was what made it impossible to look away. The casting exec turned to the producer after watching it for the 3rd time, both of them sitting in silence long after the screen went black. "Are we really going to do this?" the producer asked quietly. The exec didn't answer right away. Instead, she clicked the file again, watching the first 10 seconds on repeat. The way Timothy sat down in front of the camera, running his fingers through his hair, just like he did in every interview, every award show backstage clip. But then the switch. The way his face shifted, something cold and heavy locking into place behind those impossibly soft features. "We don't have a choice," the exec finally said. "He is Doom." The quiet offer. It came in the form of a single manila envelope, hand-delivered to Timothy's apartment by someone who didn't say a word. Inside was a letter, 1 page, no letterhead, just plain text. No Marvel logos, no legalese. "Victor is yours. If you want him." That was it. No salary numbers. No trilogy promises. No talk of spin-offs or future cameos. Because they already knew, if Timothy took this, it wouldn't be a role. It would be a crown. He sat with the letter for a long time. Not reading it, he'd memorized the words instantly. Just holding it, the weight of it heavier than it should have been. This wasn't like, "Call me by your name," or "Dune." Those were characters he inhabited, lived in for a time, and then left behind. Doom wasn't like that. Doom stayed. Doom would be in his blood, his bones. Doom would shape how the world saw him, how directors approached him, how fans whispered his name. If he did it right, there'd be no escaping him. And that was the part that scared Timothy the most. Not the fear of failure. The fear that he would love it too much. That some part of him, the part that wanted to control, to protect himself by always being 5 steps ahead, would find a home in Victor Von Doom. There was no official signing ceremony. No press release. Timothy simply took out a black Sharpie, scrawled yes at the bottom of the letter, and sent it back the same way it came. The next morning, Kevin Feige stood in front of a whiteboard in the vault. The word Doom was still circled in red. But now, next to it, they added a name. Chalamet. The future of the MCU was no longer a question mark. It was a crown. And Timothée Chalamet had just placed it on his own head. The world didn't know. Not yet. Marvel kept the secret locked tighter than Wakanda's vibranium vault. Even the most plugged-in industry insiders, those with informants and casting offices and backdoor coffee shops, had nothing but scraps to work with. They knew Timothy was talking to Marvel, sure. They knew it was big. But the who? The what? The why him? That was buried so deep, not even the leaks could touch it. But something changed in Timothée. To the public, he was the same, a walking contradiction of high fashion and thrift stories, jumping from film festival carpets to late-night diner booths with the same tousled hair and crooked smile. But to the people closest to him, his sister, his agent, his oldest friends, there was a shift. He was quieter. Not somber, exactly. Just holding something. It wasn't that Timothée was method. He never had to live inside a character's skin to find them. But Doom wasn't a character you found. He was a shadow that found you, sliding into the cracks of your mind and settling there, cold and immovable. Timothée started walking alone more, especially at night. Late-night loops through the West Village, hoodie up, headphones in, but no music playing. Just the sound of the city breathing, its pulse matching his own. It was during one of these walks, passing by a store window where the glass had just enough reflection to catch his own face, that it hit him. That soft face, the one that made him famous, the one fans called angelic, vulnerable, delicate, that face would soon belong to someone the world feared. Victor Von Doom wasn't just a villain. He was a legacy. The weight of all Marvel villains past and future would hang on his shoulders. Every glare, every word, every breath had to carry the weight of a kingdom lost, a crown seized, and a heart too shattered to ever heal. Timothée wasn't playing Doom. Timothée was becoming him. The first test. Before the official costume fittings, before the tech teams started mapping digital overlays for the mask, there was one more test. A secret screen test, buried so deep in the production schedule it didn't even have a code name. Just a single scene, no explosions, no fight choreography. Just a room, a chair and a camera. Victor Von Doom, speaking to someone who wasn't there. Timothée sat in the chair, the camera rolling, the room silent except for the hum of the lights. There was no director calling action, no script supervisor tracking lines. Just him and the weight of everything Marvel was about to become. He didn't launch into a speech. Didn't sneer, didn't monologue. Instead, he sat, hands resting lightly on the arms of the chair, shoulders relaxed but spine perfectly straight. The quiet confidence of someone who didn't need to raise his voice to command an empire. When he spoke, it was soft. "Do you know," he said, voice barely above a whisper, "what it feels like to hold the world in your hands, and watch it slip through your fingers?" The camera operator, who'd seen hundreds of tests for every Marvel project since Phase 1, felt his stomach flip. Timothée's eyes flicked downward, as if seeing something only Doom could see. Something broken. Something already lost. "You can call me a villain," he said, the whisper curling into something sharper. "A tyrant, a monster, a man who mistakes fear for respect." A pause. Barely a heartbeat. "But when the sky cracks open and the heroes kneel beside the graves they swore would never be filled, they'll remember my name." He stood, the movement slow, deliberate. "Because I gave them what they were too weak to take." He turned, walking off camera. The room stayed silent for a full 10 seconds after he left. No one needed to say it. Doom had arrived. The long game. The public reveal wasn't coming for months, maybe even a year. Marvel knew how to play the game. First, they'd drop hints, coded teases and post-credit scenes, cryptic symbols and background props, a single name whispered by some trembling side character. Rumors would swirl, some true, some planted. They'd let the fans fight, theorize, argue. And then, at just the right moment, probably at Comic-Con 2026, the screen would go dark. A flicker of green light. The faintest trace of a metallic gauntlet closing into a fist. And then the voice. Not booming. Not theatrical. Just calm. Precise. "You thought the end was your greatest fear. You were wrong." The internet would break in half. Timothée knew it was coming. Knew the world was going to lose its mind. Knew the fans who adored him, the soft, sensitive, awkward artist, would soon have to reckon with something much colder. And that's what made it perfect. Because Doom wasn't just power. Doom was betrayal. Betrayal of hope, betrayal of trust. Doom was the face you thought you could love, until it became the face you feared most. Timothy didn't want to just play Doom. He wanted to haunt the MCU. And when that mask finally slid over his face for the first time, cool metal against his skin, cutting off every trace of softness the world had come to expect, he smiled. Victor Von Doom was no longer a rumor. He was a promise. And Timothée Chalamet had made sure it was one the world would never forget.